So as a bit of background, I am a postdoctoral researcher at Brigham Young University. My dissertation involved urban forests and urban stormwater quality, nutrient loads after litter fall and things like that. But I also have spent 7 years as a classroom teacher, a lot of time in earth science. It was my passion. And so this particular image is one that I'm very familiar with. I used it a lot. USGS was one of my go-tos. I was like, oh, they've got a lot of great resources out there. But as many of you guys are probably becoming more and more familiar with, there's a beautiful image, but obviously missing some important things, and that is specifically humans. And so the history of our research group that I'm working with is back in 2019, they published this paper specifically highlighting how human domination of the global water cycle is just missing from a lot of the images and diagrams that we are producing. Showed that out of over 200 plus diagrams that they looked at, 15% showed human interaction at all with water cycle, and less than 2% showed climate change or water pollution. And I know this is, you guys are all very familiar with these issues. And so we understood this was a problem and we wanted to do something to fix it. And so at our university, we had a big interdisciplinary team get together and say, hey, we want to hire somebody. And so they hired me to help spearhead this project. And as part of this collaboration, we wanted to develop new images, which I'll talk to you about in a second, but we also wanted to make sure and reach out to the other individuals who are already using the water cycle or creating images, including the USGS, and seeing whether or not we could convince them that it was a good idea to update and maybe reconsider their depictions as well. So because the USGS is by far the most accessed water cycle image, and our collaborations with them, they really took note. And they first off just put this little caveat statement at the bottom saying this diagram shows only natural water, omitting significant impacts of humans. And I'm very happy to announce that breaking news on Thursday this week, they will be debuting their own new representation of the water cycle. So they really took this information and this research that our group had done to heart and went and spent a lot of time and effort and devoted it to recreating and reimagining how they are demonstrating or how they're showing the water cycle. So if anybody's interested in it, you can just Google USGS water cycle. And a lot of these links will pop up, but that's this Thursday. And they'll talk a lot about their process and how to develop the water cycle diagrams. And I can say that we took a very different process, and I'll take a little bit of time to highlight some of that as well. So just to reemphasize, we had a very interdisciplinary group. This is the team that I'm working with directly at our university. We come from all walks, all departments. We have engineers, soil scientists, hydrologists, dance, education, bioeducation research, as well as climate science. So there's just a very, very large team, all looking to collaborate and offer input on what sorts of diagrams need to be created, who or how best to use them in various classrooms that are being taught, and just creative ways to introduce water cycle education to the general public. So as I had mentioned, they went through the effort, they hired me, and they said, we want to create something new here. And so one of our first steps was trying to highlight what we wanted our images or what we wanted our diagrams or anything that we created to show. And so we came up with a list of 6 things, first being trying to emphasize water from a human's perspective. So looking up and out at a landscape rather than just down from a 30,000 foot view, as well as highlighting those two-way interactions between people and water, moving past the idea that we just simply use water, but how does water impact us and how can that impact the landscape and the ecosystem as a whole? One of the other things that's often a struggle is invisible water, or those lesser viewed sources of water, such as atmospheric rivers, groundwater, or the water used in food and industry, commonly called virtual water. And we also wanted to look into systems thinking skills, trying to develop and emphasize those in any of our resources and products. And then highlighting how this water cycling can change with time, whether it's short-term or long-term with overall climate change. And finally, we really wanted our resources to be broadly accessible. We are steering away from any sort of professional development or anything. We just wanted to have better images out there. And so trying to do as much work up front to make them accessible to large audiences. So before I move too far, I do want to take a moment to highlight a little bit of our process. So in order to create this, they hired me because of my background in education, my background in water research and biogeochemistry, but not for my drawing skills at all. And so one of the things we needed to do is find some really fantastic people to work with and collaborate with. And on a bit of a whim, we just reached out to some illustrators or the illustration department at our university for recommendations and started recruiting undergraduates to help us with this process and to help us work through it. And I will say that this collaboration has been absolutely a phenomenal benefit to me, to the scientists who I work with, as well as to these illustrators, just working in this collaboration of what do we want in images, what really makes sense, and how to make that happen visually. They brought a lot of creativity to what we've done. As well as appeal, if I'm allowed to say so. And we've also been able to give them opportunities to think outside the box in terms of making their images accessible, as well as really using them to convey information and to convey scientific knowledge. So all the things that I'm going to talk and show you about will eventually be available on our website, which is watercycle.byu.edu. However, I'm also the IT department for this project, and so constructing websites was not one of my fortes listed on my CV. And so it's been a slow process, especially as we continue to revise some of the things. So certainly please go there. You're welcome to access that. These images will be available for download. However, some of the links are not all up and running yet. And so if you do want access to any of the materials, I do have everything kind of in a nice Google Drive that is very easy to share. So if you send me an email right here at sophie_hill@byu.edu, be happy to forward kind of that packet of what we have created. So one of the first, I guess, general images we wanted to tackle is making sure, making sure that we include or incorporate just like humans in a modern water cycle diagram. And we also wanted to make sure we were vetting our products, making sure that they were the best that was possible, and testing to see what sort of impacts those would have on students or individuals who are viewing them. So these two images here show, we actually created 4 overall that kind of mirror this particular setup, showing a water cycle that's very typical, something that we are all a little more familiar with. And then the number 2 over here is highlighting that issue of water quality and humans on the landscape and how the human factor could be influencing water cycling. And so we also created mirror images of these from a more traditional 30,000 foot perspective, so zoomed way out looking down at a landscape. And both with humans and without humans. And what we did is we took these images and we showed them to a bunch of undergraduate non-major students in a classroom. And then we proceeded to ask them some questions pre-image and post-image, just paying attention to how their answers changed or if their answers changed in asking about solutions for or for water scarcity issues, possible causes for water scarcity issues, as well as a series of additional water-related questions there. And we have collected some preliminary data. We're currently working on the manuscript, and it seems very promising. So we found that when given any sort of a reference image that included humans as part of the water cycle on the landscape, those students were then more likely to include humans as both potential causes for water scarcity issues, as well as part of the solution for water scarcity issues. So this was very exciting to see that, again, these students had no prompting on it. They had no instruction on water cycle. All we did was just simply give them images and ask what they would do to help alleviate some of the water issues that we've noticed. So this manuscript is forthcoming. We're looking to submit it in December to a leading bioeducation research journal. And one of the other goals we were hoping to highlight with it is just describing our non-major students' knowledge about water cycling. We did ask questions of them, such as, when did you last learn about it? And many of them said elementary school. Many of them said, I haven't learned about this in decades. What is this? You know, this was the song I learned about in elementary. And so we'll have kind of those two main focuses, describing our findings, which I just shared briefly with you, as well as highlighting kind of the gap of water cycle education between secondary and upper education. So those images that I just showed you, these are kind of our answer to the USGS water cycle diagram that they are releasing this week. But some of these other resources moving forward that I will continue to show, these are things that USGS and our group have collaborated on and are hoping to incorporate in their water science school education resources that will be available on their website. And so this is what we call our Where is the Water series. As I mentioned, we really want to show water from a human perspective and kind of highlight some of those local aspects, knowing that teleconnections and a global perspective is very important, but also first steps involve recognizing where water is locally. And so in some of these conditions or some of these images, you'll see that we tried to look at different landscapes and just say, all right, here we are. Where would you find water here? And obviously there's some easy answers: the stream, the snow melt. Some can pick up on the groundwater, the springs coming up. But as part of this process, we wanted to inspire students to look a little bit deeper and think of like, well, where else could it be? And so we created a series of 6 different images. This one is our forest image. Here's another example showing just an urban scene. Again, asking where students might be, or asking where water is in the locations where people or other individuals might be. And so I'm going to kind of quickly flip through these. This is showing kind of the full poster setup of what we actually created. So we had our image, where's the water, in the upper left. The idea being, look around, take a minute, figure out where you think it might be. And then how does it move? So the second image we highlighted in blue, different locations where water would be found on the landscape, some more surprising than others. For example, in like clothing or electricity production, things like that. And then we had brief little explanations and excerpts down below, highlighting why that is important. And then how it moves, we made sure to show things like flow, phase change, evaporation, and transpiration across the landscape as well, with some further explanation about where each of those arrows go. So this is our agricultural scene. And by the way, for the group, feel free to interrupt at any time. We love getting feedback. We love having conversations about these different products that we've created. We created a coastal scene and highlighting freshwater versus saltwater and issues such as saltwater intrusion and well contamination, as well as just that idea of water quality and how that might impact. You'll notice we also have black and white line work images because a lot of our group was looking towards focusing on K-12 and elementary educators. This is a resource that they expressed really wanting to have or having access to, and how this was a very powerful teaching tool that they could use. So we have black and white line work of all of the different images that we've created. Here we have a desert scene, forested, as well as more of a suburban environment, kind of taking a step back out a little bit. And then the urban scene that I had depicted previously. So that is our Where is the Water series. Again, just trying to encourage finding water locally and thinking about how water is moving on a local perspective, with the idea being that next steps could be, once those steps have been made, you can then reach out and think a little bit more globally about how water is moving. One of the other things that has come from this, we have a lot of collaborations with area teachers. and have done a lot of trial runs, I should say, with some of these images in classrooms. And teachers have expressed a desire for some accompanying, like, additional information. So water is an issue that you can try Googling gray water, and it could give you a lot of different definitions depending on who you're talking to, whether it's a hydrologist or whether it's a gardener or something like that. There's just a lot of overlap and variation in how we're defining things. And so this is a very drafty draft that started about 2 weeks ago now, where we tried to highlight and explain some of the themes that come up a lot in our resources. So the idea of virtual water, or the water that's used to generate various products or to generate electricity. So this is water that you can't just wring out. Like, for example, my shirt, it required a lot of water to make, but you can't just wring my shirt out and see all that water pour out. It's more like a water footprint where you have to actually trace back the water that was required for manufacturing and growth of the product. And so with this, these fact sheets, they're in development. We're hoping to continue to build them as teachers give us feedback and say, hey, could you give us more information about this? As we're working with our students, we want to feel a step ahead and empowered to answer a lot of the questions the students will have. This next series of images I wanted to show highlight blue, green, and gray water use. And these, again, I just had mentioned a bit about the definitions and how, depending on who you talk to, blue water means something different. And so what we did is we created this series of posters. You'll notice poster was kind of the theme that we went with for a lot of our products, highlighting blue water use, focusing on human water extractions for the landscape, whether it's agricultural, industrial, or domestic, and trying to depict those visually. Excuse me. Green water use, looking at plants and animals and their role in water use on a landscape, and highlighting that idea of land use change. So you can see in the background of this image here, there's been research that highlights that deforestation can contribute to changes in precipitation patterns downstream. So this is where we start to bring in those global connections, or the teleconnections of water, and especially as the roles that humans play in influencing that. And then gray water use, highlighting water quality issues, different pollutants and contaminants that are often diluted in the water, and how water quality can then play a role in what water is actually available. So these products we were excited for. We thought this was new information that teachers needed. But we've actually had a lot of confusion, or kind of, I wouldn't say pushback, but just a lot of like, I'm not quite sure how to explain this, because as I said, when I Google green water, I might not get any further explanation. And so we are currently looking for ways to develop these definitions, or even create an additional image or something that highlights how different definitions are used in different fields of study, and what gray water means here might not be what gray water means in other areas. So one of the things that we did do that was quite enjoyable as part of this project, though, is we created a series of arts integrated lesson plans, getting together with groups of arts educators, and developing ways to use watercolor to teach these water quality issues. And so we presented at several teacher workshops, myself and these arts education specialists, to groups of classroom teachers, where they were able to kind of develop their landscapes after being given those posters, and to think about how the water is moving, and whether that water would be blue, green, gray, or some combination of. And as you can see, some teachers really took it to heart, going less from the watercolor approach and more to the, well, I'm going to build a landscape, and I'm going to put my water on the landscape, and I'm going to watch how it moves, and then highlight things that way. So this was a very fruitful project, because That idea of blue, green, and gray water is not something that's common in standards. It's not something that's really commonly talked about anywhere, but very important when you start to think about human connections to water. And so this gave us an additional opportunity working with arts teachers outside of the science standards themselves to introduce our work and our ideas in a different venue. And we had very positive responses from our teachers there as well. Got to take a breath. There's a lot that we've been working on. Can I just pause for a second to prevent myself from talking constantly? Were there any questions about what I've talked or shown so far, or any thoughts? Okay.
I think, Sophie, you got a lot of praise. You got praise in the chat. If this is a good moment to have a question, you could also delay this for later. I have a really general question about your experience working with illustrators, because that's something that I have never done, but some of us have. And some of the really mostly used images actually are collaborations between scientists and professional illustrators. So I'd love to hear more about this, because I think some of the images that you all created, they will also be really helpful for the critical zone context. But one of the criticism that we get on some of the imagery we use for critical zone is the same issue, right? There's no people on there, or always the same type of people. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, and I have a few more images that I think I'd like to show first, because that thought ties into some of these other pieces, because as you may have noticed, a lot of what we've created, I just let the illustrators use their own styles. So if it looks a little different than something else, it's because it was a different illustrator. And obviously those collaborations depend a lot on different personalities and different styles and things like that. So thank you for that, Julia. I'll get back to it, I promise, or remind me if I forget. So one of the other things, again, we'd worked a lot with elementary educators, and a lot of them really focused on vocabulary and the importance of introducing vocabulary. And to the point where we knew that many of the students in the classroom knew songs or YouTube videos and could sing the songs, they knew the words, but we weren't sure they were necessarily getting the connection with what those words meant, especially as far as people go on the landscape. And so we created this poster here, this poster series, where we're highlighting the common terms such as precipitation, condensation, transpiration, evaporation, and infiltration, all sounding very similar, but really highlighting human impacts as well. So with precipitation, the focus on weather and weather issues and their impacts on humans. Condensation, we emphasize things like cloud seeding, forest fires, and dust pollutants. And transpiration, we also brought out that idea of land use change. And with evaporation, including things like coming off of a factory, or how we are evaporating water, not just water coming off of the ocean. And then with infiltration, highlighting a little bit of impervious surface and how that can change how water is moving on the landscape. So I want to zoom in on our image of transpiration for a second, because again, in talking to our educators, so many of them were like, yeah, transpiration, that's that one tiny arrow in the back of our water cycle diagram. I don't usually spend a lot of time talking about it, but because it's such a huge portion of how water is moved from the soil up into the atmosphere, we really wanted to take some time to highlight it and bring it out and talk about the importance of it. And as you can see, again, highlighting the issue of land use change and how that can change how water is entering into the atmosphere. This additional project is a little bit outside of water. We also ended up making a graphic novel. It's not quite done yet, but you can see we have several different chapters, 2 of which highlight the water cycle in particular, as well as issues with biodiversity, pollution, permafrost, and climate change. It's very magic school busy, involving Zap being around and seeing and experiencing different scenarios. But one of the things that's been so fantastic about this is, especially with our water cycling chapter, we can highlight the different importances making up words, the different areas of importance within that idea of water. So first off, what's driving the water cycle? We have a section devoted specifically to that and a view from outer space, that global perspective. We have an additional section highlighting human impacts, both on local and regional, and a little bit into the water footprint here. And our final section really highlights water's characteristics. And again, this is one of the very fruitful collaborations we've had working with illustrators. It's these students were like, well, water's weird, so let's make a visual representation of water that acts a little bit weird, as you can see in some of these pictures. And that kind of gave this visual space to really highlight that, yep, when water freezes, it expands. When water has the issues like latent heat and things like that, that are quite often abstract and a little bit tricky for some of these younger audiences to understand or appreciate. So that water cycle chapter is part of that bigger graphic novel. We're working on it, not quite done. Turns out that working with illustrators who are undergraduates can take a lot of time, as obviously their priorities are school. But it has been very, very, very rewarding, I think, in a lot of what we've done. And then the final images, I'm just going to flip through these very quickly, is we just said, all right, let's go to second grade level. And rather than putting a mountain at the middle of our beautiful water cycle, which we all know this is not very accurate representation of how water moves on a landscape, but we just wanted to put a city, just again, highlighting that humans are involved in water's movement. Some of our future directions moving forward. So I was hired for a 2-year contract. I'm now entering, I've got about 10 months left, I would say. And one of our future directions is we want to translate a lot of the resources that we have. Our university has the opportunity to, or access to, a lot of different language studies. And so we're looking to create translations of a lot of what we've done. The website development obviously needs a lot of help, not just me. And a lot of these resources will be integrated into bigger organizations such as USGS's Water Science School. We also hope to make it all open access. We're not precious about how we have these images or whether they're copyrighted or not. We just want to get them out there, especially as we're accruing more and more evidence that this is really a beneficial for individuals' learning and understanding of water movement. And because of my own personal background in teaching, lesson plan development and resources is also something that's key on our mind. As far as asks for the group, we are interested in seeing if there are more higher education centered materials out there. If there's other things that this group or other professors or educators would be interested in that are directly tied to their classroom materials. And if that's the case, just further grant development and writing for additional funds beyond some of what we have done. So I think that was a quick-ish version of some of the many, many, many different products we've created. There are more that I didn't take the time to highlight, but I would love to have further conversation if anybody is interested. Here's a reminder of where my email is, as well as the website. And